The first message came through while I was halfway across the world, sitting in a dust-stained tent after a 14-hour patrol. It was from my sister back home. Her words short but sharp enough to slice through exhaustion like a knife. They put a for sale sign on your land. HOA claims they sold it. Karen is leading the charge. For a second, I thought the desert heat had fried my brain. Sold my land. How could they sell something that had been in my family for 3 generations? Land I had signed over in a trust before I deployed, so there'd be no questions about ownership. But in that moment, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a move. And there was only one person behind it, Karen, the HOA president who had been circling our property like a shark for years. By the time I managed a video call, my sister showed me the scene. Karen stood in our driveway with her wide body draped in an expensive floral blouse, barking orders into a clipboard while a realtor hammered a stake into the ground. This land is now part of the HOA-managed development, she declared to anyone who would listen. The owner abandoned it, so the community has the right to reassign. Behind her, I saw neighbors gathering in disbelief, some whispering, others filming on their phones. And there, bold as betrayal, was the bright red sign. For sale, lakeside lot, prime for development. My fists clenched until my knuckles turned white. That land wasn't abandoned. That land was mine, the deed locked in a military-secure safe, the taxes paid, the mortgage zeroed out. Karen wasn't just greedy, she was a thief draped in rules she twisted for power. I called home base, my voice steady despite the rage bubbling in my chest. Sir, I said, we have a serious civilian matter. Fraudulent sale attempt on military property. Within hours, the wheels were turning. What Karen didn't know was that the land wasn't just sentimental, it was part of a legacy deal tied to veterans' housing rights. By trying to sell it, she hadn't just crossed me. She had crossed the Department of Defense. But while the machinery of justice churned overseas, my sister wasn't about to let Karen run rampant. She marched right into the crowd and shouted, "This is theft. He's deployed overseas, and you're stealing from him." Karen turned, her smug smile spreading like oil. Deployed or not, abandoned is abandoned. The HOA has full rights. The arrogance dripped from her every word, as though my service meant nothing, as though the uniform I wore was invisible. Neighbors gasped, some muttering, "She can't do that," but none dared stand up to her directly. That was Karen's power. She made people feel small, alone, voiceless. Then came the twist. One of the men in the crowd stepped forward, adjusting the brim of his cap. His name was Roy, a retired colonel who had lived quietly at the edge of the subdivision. Most people thought he kept to himself out of age or bitterness, but that day his voice rang like cannon fire. That land belongs to a deployed soldier. You don't touch it. Not now, not ever. The crowd hushed as he pulled out his phone, showing scanned copies of the state's Military Property Protection Act. You try to sell what isn't yours, you're committing fraud, racketeering, and theft from an active duty service member. That's prison time, not HOA paperwork. Karen's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. She doubled down, snapping at him. This neighborhood doesn't care about your outdated laws. We care about our property values. The words rang like poison, and for the first time, the crowd turned not with fear, but with fury. Phones zoomed in, capturing every ounce of her arrogance. A mother clutching her toddler shouted, "Property values don't mean more than a soldier's sacrifice." Others echoed, the whispers swelling into a wave of outrage. By the time I flew home weeks later, the situation had exploded. News stations had picked up the story, running headlines like HOA sells soldiers land while he's at war. Karen tried to spin it as protecting community interests, but the videos of her screaming about property values while clutching falsified papers played on repeat. What she hadn't counted on was the response waiting for her. The morning I returned, still in uniform, a convoy of military trucks rolled up behind me. Not for intimidation, not for force, but for protection. The Department of Defense had taken my case seriously. Soldiers stepped out, crisp uniforms gleaming, carrying boxes of evidence collected during the investigation. Karen's fake contracts, the forged signatures, the bank accounts she had used to funnel deposits from interested buyers. It turned out she hadn't just tried to sell my land, she had been running a full-blown scheme to market other lots in the neighborhood as well, pretending she had authority to sell what never belonged to the HOA. The confrontation at the lake was the stuff of legend. Karen, standing on the cabin deck, waving her arms, shrieking that she was still in control. Me, standing in front of her with the deed raised high, soldiers at my back, neighbors at my side. "This is my land," I said, my voice trembling with both fury and relief. "And you stole from a soldier who trusted you. You didn't just steal property. You stole honor." The crowd erupted, the chant echoing through the pines. "Shame, shame, shame." Karen's face, usually flushed with smug satisfaction, was a mask of panic. She tried to snatch the deed out of my hand, but the soldiers shifted in unison, forming a wall that stopped her cold. The neighbors gasped, phones catching every second of her humiliation. One soldier opened a box and pulled out her forged sale contracts, reading them aloud so all could hear. The names were fake, the signatures sloppily traced, and the payment trails led straight to Karen's personal bank account. She screamed, "Those are HOA-authorized documents. You can't just..." But her voice cracked under the weight of evidence. The truth was louder than her shrieks. The local sheriff arrived minutes later, lights flashing against the water. He stepped out of his cruiser, shook my hand in front of everyone, and turned to Karen with eyes colder than steel. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for fraud, attempted theft, falsification of records, and racketeering. You thought you could sell property that wasn't yours? Not in my county." The click of the cuffs was drowned out by the roar of neighbors cheering, their voices finally free after years of being silenced by Karen's threats. But the twist wasn't over. As deputies escorted her down the driveway, one of her own board members, Harold, the treasurer, stood up and shouted, "She made me do it. She forced me to sign off on bogus fees and withdrawals." He held up a thumb drive, shaking with nerves. "Here's everything: the hidden accounts, the fake invoices, the slush fund for that so-called lake development." It was the smoking gun investigators needed. Karen turned on him, her voice a strangled howl. "You traitor." But Harold just shook his head, his voice breaking. "You ruined this community. I won't go down with you." The fallout was immediate and brutal. News crews descended on the suburb, running live segments as Karen was hauled away in the back of a squad car, her expensive blouse wrinkled, her hair plastered to her sweaty face. The headline spread across every screen: HOA president arrested for selling deployed soldiers' land. National anchors replayed the footage of me holding up the deed, of the soldiers unloading evidence, of Karen screaming about property values, while her empire collapsed around her. She had wanted to be famous for her power. Instead, she became infamous for her greed. The military didn't stop at reclaiming my property. They launched a legal review of every fraudulent deal Karen had touched. One by one, families who had been bullied into paying special assessments were refunded, their dignity restored. The so-called community cabin that Karen had leased out illegally was seized and converted into a veterans retreat, a place where service members could rest, fish, and heal with their families. The suburb that had once been her kingdom of fear became a beacon of resilience, rebuilt on truth instead of lies. I'll never forget the day the entire neighborhood gathered at the lake for the dedication ceremony. Soldiers raised the flag my son had carried before deployment, the same flag Karen once tried to sell as patriotic decor. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, some with tears streaming, as the colonel who had defended me weeks earlier declared, "This land belongs to those who honor it, not those who exploit it." The applause rolled across the water like thunder. For the first time in years, the community felt whole. Karen's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming: the forged deeds, the bank transfers, the recordings of her shouting about selling what she didn't own. Her lawyers tried to spin her as misguided, but the jury saw the truth. She wasn't misguided. She was manipulative. She was sentenced to over a decade in prison, her assets seized, her name stripped from every file and sign. The HOA was formally dissolved, and new bylaws ensured no single person could ever seize that much power again. As for me, I stood on my porch weeks later, my boots still dusty from deployment, watching my son toss a football with kids from the neighborhood. The lake shimmered in the distance, free of Karen's shadow. My sister sat beside me, smiling with relief. "You know," she said softly, "they tried to take everything from us. And instead, they lost everything." I nodded, the weight of the last month settling in my chest. Karen thought she could sell my land, but she ended up selling her soul. And maybe that's the real lesson. Power built on lies will always collapse. Honor, even quiet and unassuming, will always outlast greed. She tried to steal from a soldier overseas, thinking he was too far away to fight back. Instead, she awakened an entire community, and the military itself does stand against her. Now the suburb thrives, not under fear, but under unity. Families host barbecues by the lake. Veterans gather at the cabin for stories and healing, and every child grows up knowing that no bully, no matter how loud, can erase what's rightfully yours. So what do you think? Was Karen's decade-long sentence enough justice for trying to steal land from a deployed soldier? Or should the punishment have gone even further? Share your thoughts, because deciding what's fair in stories like this defines the kind of community we want to live in.